Hello, I'm David Scheinbaum from Scheinbaum and Russick. It's been a while since we've produced a video. It's good to see you all again. This COVID stuff has been going on and on. But I wanted to make this quick video today to share with you some information about Lynn Gessaman, who we're currently exhibiting here in the gallery. It's actually one of our first exhibits back after all this isolation, and actually during this time, at the end of 2020, Lynn passed away, and the exhibit we have hanging now is more or less a memorial exhibition. Lynn was a good friend of the gallery, a good friend of Janet and mine and Andra's. She's also a great photographer and someone whose work we've respected and admired for many years. I won't take too much of your time, but let me talk a little about her work and give you a sense, and then of course you could access our website, read more about Lynn, read more about her technique, and of course see more of her work. And we'll put a few links within this email for you so you could actually go right to our website and see her work. Most photographs that we're used to looking at, especially from the 20th century, more or less look like as Willard Van Dyke. I mean, what we call straight photography, certainly the look of straight photography prevailed in the art world in the 20th century. This Willard Van Dyke photograph is kind of appropriate for today because Willard was one of the founders of a group called F64, which was the group that promoted this look that, you know, photograph should look like itself. It should look sharp and clear. It should be a contact print. It shouldn't be cropped. And in a way, the look was opposed to everything I'm going to now talk about, and in a way, Lynn Gessaman's work. Because another look of photography at the turn of the 19th and 20th century was what we call pictorialism. Now, I've done some videos on this and I've written a lot about it, which you could access on our website. But the pictorialists were a group of photographers that kind of were in Alfred Stieglitz's circle. They were interested in producing images simply that kind of looked more like art. I put that in quotes, like an etching or a drawing. You know, things at the time were already considered art. Photography was questionable, so, you know, using the artistic look was kind of part of their motivation. So when we look at a pictorial photograph, and this one was by Clarence White, one of the main proponents of pictorialism, we see a softness of focus, we see a suppression of tonality, especially in the blacks, a suppression of detail. The looks feel very textured, very romantic, and in fact it was Clarence White who started a photography school in New York called the Clarence White School of Photography, which taught pictorialism. So a lot of the photographers in the Stieglitz circle, you know, kind of worked in the same way. This is another Clarence White. It's obviously a nude. It's an image from camera work, which was Alfred Stieglitz's journal or magazine, so to speak. This is a Heinrich Kuhn photograph. So I think you get the idea. You get the idea that we're not talking about really sharp, clear, crisp photographs. We're talking about very romantic, emphasizing a mood, a feeling. The images are not dependent on sharpness, they're not dependent on detail. It kind of was the look of the day. Now, I'll say most of the pictorialists at the time rejected this look themselves, and they became straight photographers. And Stieglitz himself started working sharper and sharper and clearer. The only one who really kind of stayed with pictorialism was Clarence White, who was teaching it and kind of promoting this look. Now, a lot of the photographers at this time were using very large cameras. They were making contact prints, which is a print the size of the negative. And they were getting the effect, this softness, this romantic softness, kind of blurry effect, when they were taking the picture. And they did various things. You know, the most obvious one is, you know, they would just slightly put the lens out of focus. Sometimes during the exposure they would kick the tripod, get a little movement. Another way to do it was they would sometimes put Vaseline on a piece of glass and kind of get the look. And Andre's gonna put a piece of Vaseline on glass, and I don't know if you could see me or not, but you could probably see I'm very soft. Sometimes they would use a stocking, put a stocking over the lens, or another piece of glass. So the idea of this softness was done during the initial exposure. And the last pictorial photograph I'll show you, which is from maybe an unlikely photographer for you in terms of pictorialism, but this is by Laura Gilpin. She didn't do a lot of pictorial work, but Laura, as a young woman, went from Colorado Springs to New York to study photography, and of course she studied at the Clarence White School, which was pretty much the only place one can go to learn photography. So she learned photography as a pictorialist, and some of her early work definitely has that same feeling. Now again, Laura was a very short-lived pictorialist, and by the time she came back to Colorado Springs, she made a few pictorial images, this being one of them. And then she started making sharper, more what we might call straight photographs. I should also mention that part of the technique of the pictorialists is they liked using platinum instead of silver. And again, I'm not going to go into that today, but platinum is another metal that could be sensitized to light, and it could give a certain mood, and because you can coat the emulsion yourself, you could coat it on different papers, textured papers, more yellow papers, and it also kind of reinforces this pictorialist look that achieved. Now Lynn Gessaman, to me, she was one of the few contemporary photographers that kind of revived pictorialism. There are not many photographers working today who I would call pictorialists. But Lynn started working in black and white, and you could see how her work kind of, you know, mimics some of these early pictorial images I'm showing you. Now with Lynn, she didn't do her diffusion, if you may, when she was taking the picture. Actually, a lot of her pictures are done with a Hasselblad. They are shot very sharp. She did her diffusion in the darkroom. So just like I explained with the pictorialist and the camera, you could, you know, put Vaseline on a piece of glass, but instead of putting it on the lens when you're taking the picture, when you're in the darkroom enlarging the picture, you could also put that under the enlarging lens. So when you're making a print in the darkroom, you're basically projecting an image down on the paper. So anything you put between the projection of the image and the piece of paper itself can give you that kind of diffusion. And there are various ways to get this kind of diffusion, but I believe Lynn used something called pictrols. And these kind of go back, some of you might have memories or heard your parents talking about in the old days, they'd go to a photographer and they would say, "Remove my wrinkles." And the photographer said, "I could do that." And it wasn't done by retouching, but by putting a slight diffusion under the enlarging lens, you can slightly put the picture out of focus, and what it would do is kind of soften the sharpness, and kind of your skin would kind of blend together, and you wouldn't see every single pimple or every single wrinkle, and you would get a more, I don't know, unwrinkled look. So there are devices that were made specifically to get diffusion. And by using these pictrols, you can almost dial, by rotating the pictrol itself, you can decide how much softness you want. So in some, like here's an image where actually the center of this image is fairly sharp, and then you start getting almost a vignette of softness. where in other images the softness is throughout. Lynn, toward the last 10 years or so of her career, she started working in color. Now again, these are all darkroom prints. They're all what we call analog. The black and white prints are gelatin silver prints, and the color prints are type C prints. But again, since they're made in the darkroom, she was able to kind of diffuse them to her liking while she was printing the photographs. So we see a kind of a contemporary pictorialist, you know, taking a cue from the history of photography, and maybe this is one reason to study your history of photography and, you know, look at some of these early techniques. You know, a lot of people now are working non-silver, they're working with other metals, they're doing cyanotype, they're doing Van Dyke. You know, there's so many things we can take from history and bring them to the 21st century. But Lynn's technique obviously is very beautiful, especially in the world today. You know, these images are very different from anything we're used to seeing. Of course, especially the color photographs, because the pictorialists weren't able to work in color because it hadn't arrived yet. So Lynn's work, to me, is, you know, worth considering if you're a collector and you're trying to have a representative collection of some of the key photographers of the 20th century, 21st century. Lynn Gessaman is certainly one of the photographers that I would consider including in my collection, and indeed she is part of our personal collection. Before I end, I just want to mention there are 3 really wonderful books of Lynn's work. Those of you who are book collectors, this first book of hers called Poetics of Place is just black and white, all of her black and white work. It's published by the Umbridge Publishing Company, Umbridge Editions. I'm guessing it's a book you could probably find online. Her second book is a book of her color work called Gardenscapes, and this was published by Aperture. And at the end of her life, this most recent book came out about 2 years ago. This is a magnificent book. It's kind of a retrospective book. It serves as a catalog for a retrospective exhibit that was hung at the North Dakota Museum of Art. It was designed by kind of one of the major book designers of the 20th century, Eleanor Caponegro. It's incredibly designed, incredibly printed. It has representative works of both her black and white and her color work. I guess if you're going to have one book, I would probably go for this book because it represents many of her bodies of work, not just of these tree photographs. So thank you for joining us today. Please take a look at the website, take a look at our current exhibit. There's an essay written about Lynn and her work, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us.